the early 70s, late 60s. Over Christmas, I was asked to go and be Lady Churchill's night nurse because she'd had a fall in the night and they didn't want her to do that again without somebody there. So I would sit with her all night, and it was over Christmas, and she was invited to Paris to her daughter Mary and husband Christopher Soames. He was then the ambassador in Paris. Lady Churchill wouldn't fly, so we went on the train with all the bells and whistles. We were met by the tourist people at the other end with the black car and the flag and all the rest, and off we went to the ambassador's residence. And I had the most amazing experience because I was invited to have Christmas dinner with the family. That was an honour. Sir Winston would not eat at a table with 13 people, and I was the 13th. One of the children
Sir Winston Churchill would not eat at the table?
With 13 people at a table. It was his superstition. Yeah. So one of the children had a large teddy bear, which sat as the 14th person.
Ah, good idea.
That's extraordinary.
Yes, and it was the most amazing experience. It really was. Mrs. Kennedy came to visit at one stage, and so I had to quickly exit the landing or whatever. Anyway, the gifts that I was given on the day were a card from Lady Churchill, and I'm looking at it now. It's a card called The Barges on the Seine by Sir Winston, and in it says...
Here we go.
With Christmas thoughts and wishes from Lady Clementine Spencer Churchill. And there was a box with 2 packs of playing cards in it. They're signed on the outside by Sir Winston, and he played with those cards after dinner.
Goodness gracious.
This is amazing. I've never
This
heard...
is extraordinary.
Yeah, fantastic.
And the
Evelyn,
lady.
Evelyn, we're going to have a part 2. It's so
Absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah.
You are going to come back on a panel to a part 2 of the story. For now, though, Michael Moynihan and Leonie Freeman, thank you very much for your time. We're going to go back to Evelyn next week, who was Lady Churchill's night nurse. See you tomorrow. Checkpoint next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Haere aki nei, he lived and died fighting for his community. The sudden death of Green MP Efeso Collins comes as an absolute shock for many. David Latally was by his side. He will join us this evening. Brace for a bad bout of deja vu. Massive change is needed to fix Oranga Tamariki, according to the Chief Ombudsman. He's investigated thousands of complaints, ordered apologies and even payments for people treated badly. Judge Peter Boscher is live. To tip or not, new technology could turn meals out into one big etiquette bellyache. And call it a puā code or virtual honesty box. Could this be the way to top up docs funding? You can watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Tēnā tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. Parliament has united in grief over the death of Green MP Fanana Efeso Collins. The House sat briefly to hear speeches acknowledging Fanana, who died during a charity event in Auckland this morning. Here's our political reporter, Giles Dexter.
Fanana Efeso Collins had only been an MP for a few months, but speakers at Parliament acknowledged his life of service to his communities. Green Party co-leader James Shaw said Fanana believed his life's work was to deliver a better life for those who followed. The Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, said Fanana came to Parliament with the same grace, humility and mana he brought to all of his work as an advocate. Labour's Deputy Leader Carmel Sepuloni said the death of her longtime friend was a loss to the country and to its Pacifica community. A waiata and minute's silence followed the speeches. Parliament is now adjourned until next week.
Papakura Marae Chief Executive Tony Kake says he got to know Fanana well during his time as a Manukau ward councillor and decades of community work.
A person that always worked for the betterment of his community and of the Pacifica and Māori community. You know, he understood the inequities out here and that good advocate for addressing those inequities.
A remembrance service is just beginning at Wellington Cathedral of St Paul. Oranga Tamariki says it's already making changes after a damning report from the Ombudsman. In a new report released this afternoon, Chief Ombudsman Peter Boscia called for the new government to make urgent and sweeping changes to the Children's Ministry. He says Oranga Tamariki is still regularly failing to follow its own laws, and that is totally unacceptable for a government agency. Oranga Tamariki spokesperson Nicolette Dixon welcomes the report but insists change is already underway.
I would point to some of the things that we do see very clearly, which is the reduction of children who have come into care for those reasons around working better with whānau, with communities. I would point to improvements we've already made in our own feedback and complaints process, and I would point to the partnerships we've built with iwi.
The Ombudsman says he will continue to keep a close eye on Oranga Tamariki. Neither fire and emergency nor the police will say whether they're treating the Port Hills fire as suspicious. The state of emergency has now been lifted in Christchurch and Selwyn. Residents have provided photos, video and statements to assist the investigation, but the fire cause is yet to be determined. A 24-year-old man who had a sexual relationship with a 13-year-old girl in Nelson before trying to flee the country has been sentenced to 9 months home detention. Kwan Long Lee faced 2 charges of sexual connection with a teen he met at a skate rink in 2022. The pair exchanged more than 7,000 messages before having sex twice. The 13-year-old told her school counsellor. Kwan Long Lee was arrested at Auckland Airport ahead of a flight to China. Food Safety says its investigation into a rat-plagued Dunedin supermarket could take months. 22 rats have been captured at Countdown Dunedin South in the last 11 days. Food Safety says it's satisfied Woolworths is taking the matter seriously and taking the right steps. Green Party candidate Geordie Rogers has won a by-election for a Wellington City Council seat after trailing on the provisional count. The Pukahino Lambton General Ward was vacated by Green councillor Tabitha Paul when she became an MP. Crystal Gibbons reports.
Independent candidate Carl Tiefenbacher led by 164 votes after Saturday's by-election closed. But the local ice cream businessman saw that lead vanish once special votes were counted, losing by 45 votes. Voter turnout was about 25%, with just over 8,500 votes cast. Mr Tiefenbacher is contemplating asking for a recount. To sport now, and known as the Little General in his playing days for his ability to control a game, Kiwis rugby league legend Stacey Jones is now in control of the Kiwis. He replaces Michael Maguire, who stood down from the role in December after 6 years in the job. Jones is the current Kiwis and Warriors assistant coach. He headed off Australian coaching great Wayne Bennett for the job. Jones' debut as national coach, however, is some way off, with the Kiwis not scheduled to play again until October. Australia's hard-hitting top order is looking forward to the smaller New Zealand boundaries going into tonight's opening T20 against the Black Caps in Wellington. Captain Mitch Marsh says the dimensions of the grounds here are challenging captaincy-wise, particularly in Auckland.
Eden Park. From my own personal experience, it's one of the best grounds in the world to play at for the atmosphere. The 40-metre boundaries may prove hard work as a captain at times, but it's all about embracing that experience, and so we're just really excited about this series. Despite New Zealand sitting second on the World T20 rankings and Australia fourth, the tourists are strong favourites to win. Meanwhile, India will rest fast bowler Jasprit Bumrah for the 4th test against England, starting in Ranchi on Friday. India lead the 5-test series 2-1. And German footballer Andreas Bremer, who scored the late penalty winner in the 1990 World Cup final against Argentina, has died at the age of 63 from a heart attack. That's the news.
Train track troubles antagonise Carterton's mayor.
It doesn't matter whether you look at this, you look at the ferries, you look at the wharfs, you look at anything KiwiRail seems to be doing. Nothing's on track, everything's off track.
A misspelt bus sign gives Westies something to laugh about.
To actually spell it wrong like they did, it's so funny. Everybody around here's having a good laugh, that's for sure.
Someone's done a Photoshop, nobody can be that dumb, but it's there, I've seen it myself.
And Chris Hipkins gets a stern start to the day.
The only person that calls me Christopher is my mother.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why I did that, but anyway, there you go.
Trouble.
No, well, you're not in trouble. Not yet, anyway.
Playing it straight. Morning report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland, mainly fine. Isolated showers inland during the afternoons and evenings. The remainder of the North Island has mostly fine weather. However, a few showers about Bay of Plenty, Coromandel and the High Country today. And from Waikato to Horowhenua, including Bay of Plenty tomorrow, mainly in the afternoon and evening. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, also Canterbury and Otago, except Clutha, fine weather. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, mostly fine. Isolated light showers about the south coast, clearing this afternoon. Light drizzle developing about Fiordland and Stewart Island tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. Showers clearing this afternoon. It is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at 20 past 5.
Kia ora rā e ho. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A kind, dedicated champion of fairness and equality, a father and man of the people. Devastated MPs and community figures have paid tribute to Fanana Efeso Collins, the Green MP who died after collapsing at a charity event this morning. He was taking part in the Child Fun Water Run event at Britomart in Auckland to support local communities in the Pacific. The shock at his sudden death has reverberated through the communities he served and loved, through to Parliament, where his journey as an MP was just beginning. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
A waiata, a wail filling the House of Parliament. MPs wiping away tears, the Green Caucus red-eyed and solemn. Their co-leader James Shaw spoke on behalf of his party, describing Fanana Efeso Collins as a proud son of the Pacific, a tireless advocate, joyful, kind and thoughtful, an extraordinary man.
And 6 days ago, standing right here in this house, Efeso Collins delivered his maiden speech. It must also now serve as his valedictory. He spoke of his journey here. He spoke of his love for his family. And that evening, Efeso was joined in celebration by some of his closest friends and family. There's a photo from the evening which captures one of Efeso's daughters dancing in full Samoan dress. Behind her, slightly out of focus, is her proud father, our friend, with the biggest smile on his face. To his girls, your dad will be your Valentines forever.
The araha stretched across the chamber, breaking party colours. One by one, leaders paid tribute.
He certainly lived by the words he uttered in his maiden speech, which was to lead with a spirit of peace and love and service. He was what I would call a true servant leader.
And I believe that we were only just starting to see his true potential and what he had to offer for Aotearoa New Zealand.
Our heart goes out to his wife, his children, his parents and his communities. We are so grateful for their generosity in sharing him with us.
And then they rose, Parliament's business suspended for the week, leaving MPs to grapple with the sudden and shocking loss. The Greens' Marama Davidson had already left for Auckland to be with her friend's family, James Shaw remaining behind to support the team.
The news has come as a profound shock. And our absolute priority is to Efeso's wife and to his young girls. Aotearoa and the Green Party have lost one of the kindest, most dedicated champions of fairness.
Efeso Collins was born and raised in the Auckland suburb of Otara. His parents arrived from Samoa in the 1960s. A devout Christian, he bore the Samoan Matai title of Fanana and made it his mission to serve his community.
There's a saying in Samoan,
E le tū whaamaunga se tangata. No one stands alone, no one succeeds alone, and for me, no one suffers alone.
From 2016 to 2022, he sat on Auckland Council for the Manukau ward alongside Alf Filipina.
People use the word charismatic, but man, he definitely that. When you talk to him, I mean, he just amazed me when we were around our governing body table or just around council, how intelligent he is. He is somebody that you will always want to listen to.
As a councillor, Fanana stood on the Labour ticket, a long-time party member with links which continued even after he later joined the Greens. One of his final social media posts was congratulating Labour's Barbara Edmonds on her promotion. She was too emotional to speak today, leaving the words to others in her Pacifica caucus.
There's a Samoan proverb which in English translates to the pathway to leadership is through service. And Efeso lived that proverb.
I've known Efeso since 1991. We really miss him from the local community too. My thoughts and prayers go out to Fia and the kids and his mum as well.
While already well known in his communities, it was in 2022 that Fanana rose to nationwide prominence, contesting the Auckland mayoralty race with a memorable campaign jingle.
Nobody else better than Efeso, cause we keep it real sweet like Nesso. Auckland, get ready for the wrestle. South AK on the map, yeah, let's go.
He came in second to Wayne Brown, who today described his former opponent as a good friend and a bold leader who he had a lot of respect for. Soon he was courted by the Green Party and ranked 11th by the membership, high enough to enter Parliament after last year's election.
Hope is coming.
As mentioned earlier, it was just last week that he delivered his maiden speech in the debating chamber, setting out his hopes and aspirations at what all thought would be just the beginning of his parliamentary career.
If I was to inspire anyone by getting to this house and my work over the next 3 years, I hope that it's the square pegs. The misfits, the forgotten, the unloved, the invisible. It's the dreamers who want more, expect more, are impatient for change, and have this uncanny ability to stretch us further.
And community leader and food bank operator David Letali was with Fanana Efeso Collins when the tragedy unfolded this morning, and he joins us now. Kia ora, David. If I could say first, our sympathies to the Collins family, whānau, the community and you. This must be an absolute shock.
Nightmare, we were 1 second laughing all together, we'd just finished. And, the next second he's on the ground fighting for his life. So, yeah, sad, really sad.
As you say, you were with him in the morning. There was no signs anything was wrong or he was feeling unwell?
No, everyone was in good spirits. We were there for a great cause, and, fighting for the Pacific as he always does. And, there was no, we're all joking around, and it was, we just finished the prize giving of, and he dropped, so yeah, it was surreal.
People will be struggling to understand it. Was the race strenuous?
No, it wasn't strenuous, and we were just walking around like a little course, nothing strenuous about it, and it just life's so fragile, hey, and we just feel for his wife and his two daughters. It's just, it's a nightmare.
I understand, David, you stayed with him?
Yeah, look, I just wanted to make sure that, the emergency, the responders were amazing and the public were amazing, but I just wanted to make sure that there was prayer and that he was surrounded by, given the respect that he deserved, and which was given, and we made sure there was plenty of prayer around him as he was going through that. So, we stayed with him just to make sure that.
What is it you admire about Efeso?
Oh, listening to his speech there, he's describing us, he's describing me, he's describing our people that don't fit in, that, they're impatient for change. And that's what he represented. He represented, although, we don't always agree on everything politically, I looked at him as an inspiration in terms of where he's come from and that where he was. And the sad thing is that he was only just getting started in terms of the impact that he was about to have for our people, now being in Parliament, and having someone there that is for us and is fighting for us. We've lost a champion for our community.
And how do you think the community will cope with that?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. We'll always, come together and pray. And that's one thing I said to the people that were there, as all the participants and everyone that was involved, was crying. Efeso was a man of faith, so in our faith, we believe that, he will rise again when Jesus returns. So take some comfort in that, that he was a believer, and, that's what we believe, that he will rise again.
You touched on this, David. You say that he battled for his community during his life, and he was actually battling for his community when this happened.
Yeah, he was there fighting for the Pacific, fighting to get clean drinking water into the Pacific for children there, and he literally died fighting for that, fighting to raise funds and awareness for something that he believed in. And he walked the talk.
I really thank you for your time, David. I know it's a very difficult situation at the moment. David Latali there, who was with Fanana or Efeso Collins when that tragedy unfolded this morning. It is 17 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Change on a scale really required. That is what is needed to fix Oranga Tamariki, according to yet another scathing report into the agency, this one by the Chief Ombudsman, Peter Bosher. The investigation reviewed thousands of complaints about OT, detailing what the Ombudsman describes as some of the most concerning treatment of vulnerable people at the hands of an agency tasked to protect Tamariki. Among them, a rangatahi kept in an institution against their wishes for years, and a young disabled mother whose baby was uplifted at birth and never returned. The report found 109 deficiencies. Oranga Tamariki was told to make almost 60 formal apologies, and in 13 cases advised to pay financial remedies. In short, the Ombudsman concluded he can't be sure OT is consistently doing a good job, and Peter Bosher joins us now. Kia ora. If you don't trust Oranga Tamariki, how can the public trust it to do its job?
Well, precisely. And Lisa, it grieves me to have this report and have this interview, because how many times have we raised these issues? But the reason I did it, we were given increased oversight of Oranga Tamariki 4 years ago. We decided that the complaints needed to be looked at as a whole in order to get themes and in order to try and see what assurance was necessary. It's worse than I thought it would be.
So you advised in 13 cases that they should pay as part of the remedy. I mean, how bad does it have to be when you're telling a government agency they basically need to compensate people financially?
Yes, well, one of the cases you mentioned in the intro, we felt that in order to help restore dignity in mana, often by the time it gets to us, it's really hard to restore the child to go back to the mother because time has really changed everything. And we felt that to try and redress some of the damage done, I know money never, ever restores, but at least it's showing that it helps to recognise the actual hurt.
That seemed to be a pretty egregious case, and for people listening, this was a young woman with a disability. Oranga Tamariki took her child at birth from hospital. You reviewed the case after she had asked several times for her complaint to be investigated. This is back in 2014. This is how long she's been battling. And you found that Oranga Tamariki's treatment of her was unreasonable. Are they treating disabled people with prejudice and contempt?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. What I would say, and of course we found this in our Hitaki Kuhukihuki report on uplifts of young Māori pepe, under Section 78 of the Act, we found that so often Oranga Tamariki failed to appreciate disability and failed to realise that just because there was a disability didn't mean an uplift was appropriate. With this mother, it took her ages to get through the system, and what we found was Oranga Tamariki had not appreciated that with support and other wraparound, an uplift and removal might not needed to occur. So in answer to your question, I know I have a dedicated disability team. So importantly do I take adherence to the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities that we're insisting that due attention is paid to it.
But that's a case where it's too late, isn't it? The child is gone from the mother's care and never returned.
That's correct. And I'm afraid this happens. And one of the other things that we've said in our report is this, and as you know, in my past I was a judge. So how many times have I made orders based on information as a judge, moving custody on information which was inadequate and sometimes presented to me in a biased fashion to achieve the result that the social worker wanted? Now that hurts me deeply because I don't know now on reflection whether some of my decisions were correct.
Right, so the report details the fact that false and outdated information is being supplied to family courts by Oranga Tamariki. So have children unnecessarily been taken away from their families because of that?
I don't think there's any doubt that decisions have been made which were incorrect. I really just don't doubt that whatsoever. And you'll see in this report there are instances where we take the view that a range of decision-making has led to an incorrect result. I don't think there's any doubt at all from the Hitaki Kuhukihuki report that in relation to some uplifts, we felt that if they'd observed a proper process of a whānau hui, consultation, looking for other ways than leaving it until the last minute, uplifts might not have been necessary.
I'm interested in your use of the word bias. So is you suggesting in some cases it's not a mistake, it's intentional?
I'm suggesting it's intentional. We found that in one of the cases when we looked at the material and assessed the report to the family court and the clinical case notes, the evidence had been presented in a slanted fashion. There's just no equivocation over this. That had happened.
That sounds contemptuous of the court process.
Well, it's important that judges know that testing these things very carefully. There's another thing I want to raise too. Not only should the court expect proper, pure evidence, but one of the things I've recommended to Oranga Tamariki is that it has some of its work peer-reviewed, that it's properly supervised. You know, in the most dreadful case I've handled, either as a judge or in the last little while as the Ombudsman, is Malachi Shubeck's. Nothing happened in that case, and if there had been a peer review or supervision, that little boy might still be alive.
So does Oranga Tamariki, in your view, need to go back and correct all incorrect records because they stand and they're a basis for future information and decisions as well?
So often, Oranga Tamariki relies on outdated information, and in one of the cases that you mentioned in your intro, we found that the information relied upon to uplift a child was outdated and not current. Whether or not the task of redressing all past wrongs is something capable of being done, I doubt. I do think the challenge for the new government and for the new minister, and that's why this report is deliberate, is it's time to get this right. It's time for the basics to be addressed and for us to start getting the confidence we need.
Why does it take you telling them in about 60 cases they should apologise? Can they not see that themselves? I
don't know why it sometimes takes the Ombudsman to do this. What I'm doing to you now, speaking fairly fiercely, I can't tell you why some agencies are very, very prompt to respond and want to respond, and some others find, as a result of their culture, it's so difficult to say sorry and it's so difficult to change.
Appreciate you coming into the studio. That is the Chief Ombudsman, Peter Bosher there. 25 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Get in touch about that report on Oranga Tamariki. A change, unprecedented change, needed to fix it up, we're told. Do you think the government's capable of that? What should happen? 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Tributes have been paid to Green MP Fanana Efeso Collins after he collapsed and died this morning during an Auckland charity run. Green Party co-leader James Shaw says the loss of the 49-year-old married father of 2 young daughters had come as a profound shock. Party leaders spoke warmly of Fanana in Parliament this afternoon, where he had delivered his maiden speech last week. Community leader and food bank operator David Letele was with Fanana at this morning's run. He told Checkpoint the Pacifica community had lost a champion. The Chief Ombudsman says he can't be sure Oranga Tamariki is consistently doing a good job after reviewing thousands of complaints about the children's ministry. Peter Bosher told Checkpoint the situation was worse than he thought it would be. Oranga Tamariki says it is already making changes. An artist has won a Court of Appeal ruling against her ex-husband for copyright ownership of her work. Serpa Elise Alalakola appealed a claim for the transfer of copyright that would have allowed him to earn money from her art. The court agreed she should be given full ownership. Fire and Emergency is scaling back work on the Port Hills fire, and the local state of emergency for Christchurch and Selwyn has been lifted. The fire's cause has yet to be determined. And the Oscar-winning director Sam Mendes is to make 4 films about the Beatles, each told from the viewpoint of the different band members. The films will come out in 2027, although whether John, Paul, George or Ringo's story comes first has not been revealed. Looking at traffic now, and everything around the country appears to be moving as usual at almost 5:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 to 6.
That's a lot of films about the Beatles.
That's a lot. That's a lot. Apparently there must be an appetite.
Absolutely. Thank you, Evie. He was known as the Little General for his ability to control a game, and now New Zealand Rugby League legend Stacey Jones is in control of the Kiwis. Jones will replace Michael Maguire, who stood down from the role in December after 6 years in the job. And joining me now is sports reporter Jonty Dine. Bit of a coup, is it, Jonty?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both fans and players will be really wrapped with this decision. Jones, he's a big fan favourite, particularly in the early 90s and 2000s, been playing for the Warriors and Kiwis, produced a heap of memorable moments. Probably what comes to most people's minds will be that try in the grand final in 2002. So a magician on the field, and by all accounts, very much respected off it. Of course, it's not a big leap, as he's already currently the assistant coach of both the Warriors and Kiwis, and he will stay on with the Warriors. The club's fully supporting him doing both roles, and as the Kiwis won't play till October, it's likely there won't be much of a clash. And Jones, of course, saying that he believes it's important to be around the game day to day. He's still learning plenty as a coach, and he beat out some pretty impressive candidates, namely Australian great Wayne Bennett. But CEO Greg Peters, he said he believed it was again time for a Kiwi to coach the Kiwis, and knows how passionate Jones is about the jersey.
I'm very honoured and privileged to be in this position. I know what the Kiwi jersey is all about. I mean, it's kind of like when you make your debut, when you get picked for the Kiwis for the first time, it's sort of got that feeling again. The squad that could be available to us is something really special, and the players that I select or staff that are involved, I want to make sure that they know their roles and can take ownership of it. Obviously the buck stops with me.
So Jones was endorsed by both Warriors coach and captain for this gig. So I think that says a lot about just how respected he is in New Zealand Rugby League circles. Let's
switch to cricket now. The wait is almost over for the Australia Test.
Yes, here we go. Just under 2 hours now. Pretty pumped up for this one. Trans-Tasman cricket rivalry always produces something special. And this one has been a long time coming. So the first T20 in Wellington tonight, the Chapel Hadley Trophy will be up for grabs. Historically, it's only been on the line in 50-over series. And the match also marks the start of the first full Australian tour since 2016. So very long time between drinks. And if we go back to the last T20 between these two sides, that was at the 2020 T20 World Cup. And that day, Finn Allen and Devon Conway blasted the Aussies all around Sydney, and the Black Caps won by 89 runs. Now, Allen's continued his hot run of form, recently scoring a century against Pakistan. But Conway, on the other hand, he's in a very lean run. He hasn't passed 50 in 20 international innings, and he'll really be needed against the Aussies. The Black Caps are missing some key personnel trial tonight. Tim Seifert, Matt Henry, Daryl Mitchell, they're all out with injury, while Kane Williamson, he's at home awaiting the birth of his third child. So in his absence, Mitch Satner, he'll lead the side, and he said they've become used to the odds being stacked against them, so that's nothing new. First ball will be at 7:10, huge crowd expected. The weather's turned it on, so all set for a cracker.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonty. That is sports reporter Jonty Dine. Could tipping become the new norm in restaurants around New Zealand? A rollout of new upgraded EFTPOS machines has been posing the awkward tipping question to customers on a brightly lit screen hard to ignore. Do you want to tip 5, 10 or 15%? Some restaurant owners and staff believe it's time Kiwis were a bit more generous, while others say it puts pressure on customers. Bella Craig reports.
Tipping has never been part of the Kiwi culture. In fact, tourism websites clearly state tipping is not customary and not required in New Zealand. The general view is that it's because employers are required to pay a minimum wage to staff. But with the current cost of living crisis, some hospo workers say they rely on tips to make ends meet.
For me to be able to save any money, tips are really important. It's the only way that I am able to save money at the moment. Otherwise, I would be left with nothing to go towards any future costs for my car or if I want to travel or anything like that.
Alex is a student at AUT and says in her 3 shifts a week, she can earn as much as $150 in tips. She believes tipping should become the norm.
The restaurant that I work in, tips go to not only waitresses, but it also goes to kitchen staff and bar staff and everyone who is putting in work to make your experience at the restaurant a great one is also getting the extra money.
Michael Dirth, restaurant owner of Badoozie in the Grove in Auckland, says tips support his staff, some of whom are still at school.
I think if someone's going to go above and beyond and give a bit of that extra love, I think it's great to have tipping because it does trickle down to these kids that are students. They're going to school, they get that goes right back to the guys, and it's just a nice little motivation for them to learn the menu, learn the wine list, learn the cocktail list, learn more and excel more, even though they're maybe going to school to be something else.
But he is quick to say customers are not judged if they choose not to tip.
We shouldn't make it awkward. I think with everything, it's just a clear, it's like asking someone if they want to have a bottle of mineral water or filtered tap water. We're not judging you. If you want tap water, you have filtered tap water. If you want to have sparkling water, you have sparkling water.
However, some restaurant owners and staff believe the newer EFTPOS machines almost turn people off tipping. Henry Fisher is a 17-year-old waiter at Hallertau Brewery in Clevedon.
I've just been in the UK last month and they had already been rolled out. And as a waiter, I almost find it a bit rude. I feel like pressuring customers into tipping makes them want to do it a bit less.
And his boss, Stephen Plowman, agrees, even though they've upgraded to the newer machines.
Well, I think it's an option that we didn't activate. I think you can actually turn it off. As far as I understand, yeah, because we've just upgraded all our machines and we haven't activated that function.
He says tipping through a machine takes away the personal element.
The whole EFTPOS tipping thing, it lacks accountability because the money goes to the owner of the restaurant and you're relying on their goodwill and to give it back to the staff.
Stephen Plowman says while asking customers at top-end restaurants to tip might be okay, asking for a gratuity at cheaper family restaurants might be a bit much. Restaurant Association Chief Executive Marissa Boudoir says the customer is still able to discreetly decline to tip without the situation being awkward.
I think that as far as the way that I understand that the terminals are set up is that a customer can still discreetly decline to give a tip as well. So it says on the screen there you have the option to do one or the other. And if you choose not to, that is still an option for you. So, there's still a way that you can manage that as a customer without having to necessarily tell someone, look them in the eye and say no.
And as far as sharing tips among staff, she says a survey of restaurants showed 98% of them do. As for Alex, she reckons if you're happy with your service, you should show it.
A lot of tourist tips, so because our restaurant usually gets a lot of people from overseas, but anyone can tip, really. And I find that I tip whenever I go to a restaurant.
Okay, we'd love your feedback on that one. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Do you feel like you should tip by percentage or just an amount? It's going to make the meal more expensive, and I wonder where they go. They say they share them, but how? Proportionately or what? You can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And to breaking news now, 60 firefighters and 15 trucks are battling a fire in the Auckland suburb of Onehunga. Checkpoint understands the property is a commercial premises on Galway Street. We'll have more on this developing story throughout the programme. 25 minutes away from 6, Ki amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e naenei ko Nona Peltier, who is in the studio. Air New Zealand is asking the government to rein in Auckland Airport's spending plans. What's the concern?
Well, it's a lot of money. That's the concern. So basically, this goes back to, we've had lots of discussions about this over the many years it's been in the news. And this is where Auckland Airport is looking to improve its aeronautical services. For example, the domestic airport. It's not attached to the international one. The idea is to bring them together, that sort of thing. There's a lot of improvements to be done there. They're a long time coming. No one says they shouldn't be done, but at what cost? So the cost that's being proposed to do that and other things, the airline, Air New Zealand, Greg Foran, the chief executive, says it would add about, at the moment, it'd be about $9 per person is what you pay for those fees to cover those costs. And in the future, within 10 years, it would be $46. It's a 5-fold increase. He said that will make it unaffordable for some people to travel because it's just going to add so much to the price of a ticket. Auckland Airport doesn't agree. They say, no, the price is reasonable, that they need to spend that much money to bring the airport up to an international standard. And they've come up with a proposal which they say everyone's had a go at input over the many years it's been tossed about. However, now it's under review by the Commerce Commission, and the Commerce Commission are going to make a determination about whether or not they think that these regulatory fees are appropriate. Well, now the minister responsible has been brought into the discussion. This is the Commerce Minister, Andrew Bailey, and he's basically been asked by Air New Zealand to intervene. They're saying there should be a review of the regulation, which is no longer fit for purpose, because what it does is this. Auckland Airport comes up with a plan, they consult with the industry, and then put forward their plan. That's what the regulatory review calls for. Air New Zealand says that's not appropriate. There needs to be negotiation and arbitration or mediation or something to negotiate. Auckland Airport says that's totally unworkable. Well, it's an issue that's not going to go away because we're talking about a lot of money over the next decade.
It is interesting though, Nona, because the airline is saying it would take the cost of a ticket up 40-something bucks in 10 years' time, only if the airline passes on the entire cost, because some people would argue maybe it should be absorbed out of profits.
Could be. So there would be those kinds of issues that might need to be discussed. What Andrew Bailey is saying is, well, he's prepared to let the Commerce Commission do its review, see what that turns out to be, and then decide whether or not there needs to be a regulatory review. In the meantime, though, he's not happy about the extra costs that consumers will have to wear. And he is going to be talking directly to the Auckland Airport Chief Executive, Kerry Huri Hanganui, and saying, listen, is this the best you guys can do? She's saying, yeah, it is. It is the best we can do. We're offering up something here that's really great and which Auckland needs. So this isn't going to be the end of the discussion. I think we're just still at the starting blocks. And it's been a discussion that's been going on for at least a decade or longer.
Okay, Nona, should we glide gently through the markets?
Let's do that. Okay, so the way this worked out was that Air New Zealand's share price, it rose a little bit on this at 0.8%. Whereas Auckland Airport's barely moved at all. The top 50 index, though, it fell I wonder if I've actually updated these numbers. I think I have. It fell slightly. Now, I'm going to have to double check because I have a feeling that these are
Okay,
all
we'll
numbers.
take that one under advisement. But why don't you tell us about the dollar?
I will tell you about the dollar. So we're just under 61.9 US cents and 93.6 Australian, 49 British pence. The reason why the Kiwi is rising is because there is some additional information coming out from the US Federal Reserve. They're going to have their minutes coming out overnight, and that will give the chance for the market to digest it. There is a hope there that maybe it will show that interest rates will be coming down sooner than later. China has also reduced its interest rates to pop up to support its own economy. These things are adding to the idea that maybe the Kiwi is on its way up again.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o Whakaaro, I'm interested in your thoughts on who should pay for the upgrades at the Auckland airport. Should it all be passed on to travellers via their air tickets or absorbed in some other way? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and you can email us. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Anea Iwi, mena pita pita kōrero.
Oranga Tamariki says change is already underway after a damning report from the Chief Ombudsman. Peter Bosher has called for the new government to make urgent and sweeping changes to the Children's Ministry, saying it's regularly failing to follow its own laws. The president of a rugby club where Green MP Fanana Efeso Collins volunteered says the South Auckland community is reeling after his death earlier today. The MP, father of two and former Auckland mayoral candidate, collapsed after a charity run in the city. Willie Maea, president of Otara Scorpions Rugby League Club, says it's been hard coming to terms with Fanana's passing. Several fire crews are dealing with a commercial building fire in Auckland this afternoon. Fire and Emergency says 15 trucks and 60 firefighters are fighting the blaze at the single-level building in the suburb of Onehunga. New Zealand Food Safety says its investigation into the rat-plagued Countdown Dunedin South supermarket could take months. 22 rats have been captured since the 10th of February, with another sighted this morning. Owner Woolworths is hopeful the store can reopen on Saturday. And police in Australia have arrested a taekwondo instructor on suspicion of murdering 3 members of the same family. The bodies of a wife and child were found at a martial arts studio in Sydney. The husband's body was later found in a nearby home. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, no delays apparently currently on the roads, although that fire in Onehunga might be changing things, but we haven't any advice on that yet.
Yeah.
Our next news and weather is at 6.
Maybe if people could text us if they're in the area and it's affecting the roads. 2101 on text. We would love to hear from you. Thanks. And an update now on that big fire in the Auckland suburb of Onehunga. Fire and Emergency was called to the blaze on Galway Street at about 4:40 this afternoon. Fence says the fire is in a 20 by 30 metre building. It's thought to be a factory. It was burning fiercely when they arrived. 15 crews are there working on the fire. Black smoke is billowing over the area. If you are in or around there, please let us know what you can see and what is happening. 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We would love to hear from you. A woman clung to a cow that swam her to safety as floodwaters rapidly rose. The story of cow 569 became an enduring tale of survival from the lower North Island floods of February 2004. There was record rain and destruction, but the storm was also the catalyst to do better. Jimmy Allingham reports.
The lower North Island is still swamped tonight and the rain keeps falling.
It was a sodden week that those who lived through will never forget, including Kim and Keith Riley. As the swollen Manawatu River began to swallow their share milking farm next to the entrance to the Manawatu Gorge, the pair sprang out of bed into the dark to move stock. Mrs. Riley remembers how fast the waters rose on the morning of the 16th of February 2004.
And it was nearly like running a bathtub. That's how fast. It sounds really ridiculous, but it was. I could stand there and actually see it just creeping up that post. And so the cows spooked, and next thing we're all floating together and floated over fences, and it was like, wow, this is a little bit serious.
It was more than that, as many parts of the Manawatu and Rangitikei regions bore the brunt of the most devastating floods in 100 years. They ultimately caused hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. About 1,500 people were forced out of their homes, 200 were damaged, and towns were cut off, while up to 300 mils of rain fell in some areas. As it began, Mrs. Riley had to get to safety.
I guess I was in the water for something like 40-odd minutes trying to swim across the current and get back over to the motocross area, and I didn't have the strength to do that, so I thought, well, I actually need to find something that I can grab a hold of, whether it's a log or a bit of flotsam, and this cow happened to come past pretty close and I just grabbed her.
Cow 569, a black and white Friesian, was a strong swimmer, and Mrs. Riley, uninjured, clung on until the pair reached a dry bank. A concerned Keith Riley eventually found his wife.
When I first landed on the bank next to 569, sat there for a few seconds, I thought, gosh, this is dramatic. I went to stand up and I couldn't. I collapsed.
Kim was distressed. She plays it down a bit. She wasn't in a good shape. She had been trying to get cattle that were stuck in fences, you get them out with bare hands, etc. So we quickly got some fencing gear and sorted that out. But no, Kim was a bit traumatised by the whole situation.
15,000 people were without power. Wind gusts of 230 kilometres an hour were recorded on the Tararua Range, and 4 rivers burst their banks. Then Manawatu Mayor Ian McKelvey got an early morning call warning him of what was to come, and spent 5 hours on a treacherous 4-wheel drive journey from Taihape to Fielding.
South of Wairau was the first bit of it we really saw, and it was just amazing. The water down the main road and through the Mangawekas was terrible. Well, I don't think you could imagine how bad it would be, although, and the thing you couldn't imagine was the damage that was done by the stop banks bursting, and that probably hadn't happened before.
The council building was surrounded by water, so an emergency centre was set up at the Fielding fire station. Mr. McKelvey remembers a full-on week and credits the government at the time for a swift response.
You can still see some impacts of 2004 if you know what you're looking for. I've watched one house go for nearly 20 years now, and it's almost repaired. And so it's taken a long, long time. And the other impact, of course, was people who were uninsured, and we've seen that with Canterbury and with the cyclone.
No one died in the Manawatu floods, and their legacy is better protection for if it happens again, such as the enlarged stop banks along the Manawatu River through Palmerston North, where I meet Horizons Regional Council Group Manager Catchment Operations, Dr. John Roygard. As work to strengthen and divert the river's path goes on behind us, Dr. Roygard remembers how 2004 unfolded.
Originally we thought it was a pretty standard event, and I think pretty quickly on people realised how fast and how far this one was going. And we started to lose sight of some flow recorders, so we weren't getting information in from some places, and a call was made to open the floodgates, and we got on and did that. And then we did that for days on end.
That's the Motua floodgates in Horowhenua, where unprecedented volumes of water were channelled to the Sodden floodplain. Dr. Roygard remembers seeing a shipping container float past. Then the long recovery started.
Yeah, there was some big conscious decisions about what sort of levels of protection do we want to provide, how do we provide more consistency in that. So we've seen places like Palmerston North raise to that 500-year level of protection. The areas outside of Palmerston North around that 100-year level of protection, and long-term programs to achieve that.
Kim Riley's Cow Ride to Safety lived on in print. She wrote 2 children's books out of the experience.
I was called the Cow Lady for quite a few years after the book was published, but now it's like there's not many people that seem to remember it. It's 20 years ago after all, and there's been a lot of water under the bridge.
But none of it as damaging as the 2004 floods.
It is 12 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And an update, you would have been on the edge of your seat for this from Nona Peltier. The local top 50 index rose 19 points to 11,590. Nona was unable to lay her hands on that earlier in the program, but there you have it. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Absolutely flooding in on tipping and tipping etiquette. Rob says, the first time I came across one of those machines, meaning the FPOS machines with the tipping function on it, I nearly gave them my PIN as a tip. Would have been a big day for the restaurant, says Rob. I can see how that would be an easy trap to fall into. Another person says, tips, no way. This is New Zealand, not the US. What a dangerous road we travel. That from Sheila in Gisborne. Kia ora, Sheila. What's my hometown looking like today? And a lot of you in the same vein saying, resist Americanisation. Tipping is a load of toss. Further Americanisation of our culture like Halloween. Profit shift to rich owners. Greedy. Another person says, definitely against tipping. The price of meals out is already too high to be out of reach. You don't expect to tip staff in supermarkets or any other retail outlet. No to tipping. And used to run bars and restaurants, says that person. Thank you, Andrew, for your feedback. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Interested in your views on tipping or anything else you've heard on the programme this evening. Lawyers for Julian Assange are continuing their bid to fight a US extradition order, telling the UK High Court the WikiLeaks founder is being prosecuted for standard journalistic practices and is at risk of suffering a flagrant denial of justice. If they fail and Assange is tried in the US, he could face up to 175 years in prison on spying charges. Assange wasn't in court, too ill to attend. The ABC's Steve Fanana reports.
Hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Royal Courts of Justice for what could be Julian Assange's last stand. His lawyers are seeking leave for a full appeal against the decision to extradite him to the US. This is the most political of cases, with the Australian Parliament last week passing a motion calling on the UK and the US to release the WikiLeaks founder. Outside the court, his wife Stella Assange called on the authorities to drop the case.
There is no possibility of a fair trial if Julian is extradited to the United States. He should never be extradited to the United States. He would never be safe. The United States plotted to murder my husband. He is being accused of journalism.
Mr Assange's lawyer, Edward Fitzgerald KC, told the court that the treaty that covers extraditions to the US states that extradition shall not be granted for political offences. He made the case that the espionage charges are political because the publishing of classified documents by WikiLeaks exposed wrongdoing by the US government, including what he called torture, rendition and war crimes. And he accused the US of using the criminal justice system to silence his client. Mr Assange was given permission to appear in court, but was too ill to attend. WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, Kristen Raffson, told the ABC he was not in a good state.
It doesn't surprise me that he couldn't be in court because I've been observing through my visits throughout every few weeks how his health has deteriorated, his weight loss, his immune system is breaking down, he has had a terrible lung infection. It's so severe that basically his ribs broke from coughing.
During today's hearings, lawyers for Mr Assange said there was evidence that now shows the US previously hatched a plan to either kill or kidnap Mr Assange, something former CIA chief Mike Pompeo has denied. The UN Special Rapporteur for Torture, Alice Jill Edwards, attended proceedings and told the ABC it's time the case was dropped.
I think he is at risk of suicide. The medical evidence is there to suggest that it would be a terrible indictment on our democratic systems, that we would lose another human rights defender in this way.
Lawyers for the US government will make their legal arguments tomorrow. They're expected to argue that Mr Assange risked the lives of informants by publishing their names, an issue Justice Johnson brought up in the court today. The US Justice Department did not respond to requests for comment.
And let's go to some more of your feedback. So much coming in on the issue of tipping. This person says if hospitality staff want to be tipped like they do in the US, perhaps we should pay them the same low wage. Another one, after living in North America, I say New Zealand should give a big no to tipping. 15 to 18% on top of tax is expected as a minimum, even when staff have ignored you for the first 10 minutes of arrival and provided pretty average service. Do keep it coming, 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Could the answer to clogged toilets and a lack of funding for popular hiking tracks be, well, a puā code or a virtual honesty box? Earlier this week, DOC was forced to close the popular Mueller Hut route on Aoraki Mount Cook to day trippers because the toilets were almost full. In a briefing to the government, DOC repeatedly sounded the alarm over funding, saying it can't afford to maintain its assets. Visitor congestion's an issue and it's time to consider more user charges. Now, some of you told Checkpoint you'd tried to leave a koha or donation for trail upkeep, but there was no easy way to do that. But a local business could have the solution. Easy Director Wayne Campbell joins us now. Kia ora, Wayne.
Hi, Lisa.
What have you got that could help?
Well, it's a really simple user-pay system that allows visitors to go up to the start of a track, scan a QR code on their phone, and then pay a small donation or fee to use the services. Simple as that.
Could people nominate how much they want to pay rather than having a set fee? You could pay what you can afford.
Absolutely, they can. And it could even operate for like visitor buses and visitor vans, where the driver could go in and select the number of passengers that he's got on board to pay for their access into the park.
So it is in essence like a virtual honesty box.
It is, yes. It's not like the old clunker honesty box that, sometimes gets ripped off. It's just a simple app, and that takes payments, and then that could get paid to DOC to service these toilet facilities.
What are the circumstances or businesses that may be similar but not exactly the same, where this has been used and been relatively successful? Can you give us some examples?
Absolutely. So if you're a visitor to a local golf club, but you're not a member of that golf club, you can just go to the golf club and scan the QR code at the club, pay for your round of golf, and off you go. We've got roadside stalls. If you want to buy some honey, you can just scan the QR code or buy some plums. And so really what we're trying to do is to change our culture to some extent. I mean, who would have thought 10 or 15 years ago that Kiwis would pay for water? We think there's a need for a culture change here, and we can make that happen.
This is based on using your phone, right? So that relies on cell coverage. And I suppose that one question mark is that a lot of these places that people are going to are remote.
Well, yes, you've raised an excellent point there, and I suppose what we're doing is we're really thinking about what's going to happen in the future with Spark and One New Zealand, who are planning the satellite coverage. And so at Mount Cook, where this particular problem is at the moment, we have coverage. But obviously, if we're talking about taking the service to farm owners and other property owners who want to charge for fishermen or mountain bikers to come onto their land, then we may be a little bit restricted at this stage, but in the not too distant future, we'll have that covered as well.
Wayne, how costly is this? Because you've got to think about, what you're paying out for what kind of return. So is it pricey? Can you give us a bit of an idea?
Well, there's no ongoing costs or equipment required for what we call the account holder. So if we're talking about DOC, there's no investment required to get this up and going. All it requires is to have this QR code displayed either at the beginning of a track or on an information board, and then the user pays a small fee. So depending on their method of payment, so they can pay it by internet banking or they can pay it by credit card.
Ah, I see.
And then there's a small processing fee as well.
We've got a smart audience, Wayne, and someone's asking. So can you clarify this, please? Whether it is possible to take a picture of a QR code if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have coverage, and then could you scan that later and make a payment from the picture? Would it work?
Absolutely, you could. You could even take a picture before you got to the. In fact, some of these golfers, people in the office will take a picture of that, or log it. You can log into a website as well to get access to this. So, for example, we've got a trail up in Taihape, and the chartered accountant there saw the benefits of the golf club using our service, and he said, "We've got a trail in Taihape that we're trying to get off the ground. Can we use it in that situation?" So
interesting. You can rely on a chartered accountant to work out how to bring in some money. Thank you for your time, Wayne. Really appreciate it. That is Wayne Campbell, who is the director of Eeso. That is an interesting suggestion. What do you think about it? 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. A lot of you last night were concerned if you start charging for trails, only those people with the finance could use them. You want them to be accessible to everyone. This would be a way of making a donation at the level you could afford. 2101 on text. Tweet tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. It is fair to say, from the volume of feedback, you are not keen on tipping. Although this person says, as a tour guide and driver in Queenstown, tips are the only way to make this job viable. That's a reflection on the level of pay you're getting, isn't it? It's an interesting dilemma.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The Prime Minister says he spoke to Fanana Efeso Collins just 2 weeks ago and could see he loved his family. The 49-year-old died after collapsing during a charity run to support local communities in central Auckland this morning. Christopher Luxon says he's gotten to know him over the past 2 years, more recently talking to him about work-life balance.
I ended up sitting out with him in the corridor and we had a good sort of 15-minute chat actually about how to balance work and family life and, you know, this place and my 3 years here and what I'd learned about trying to do that and what he was learning about it. But he was generally really excited about being here and he was, really open and he's just a lovely guy.
Christopher Luxon says his government has offered to support Fanana's family in any way it can. One of those with Fanana Efeso Collins when he died today says he just dropped to the ground out of nowhere. David Letelier told Checkpoint they had just been walking around a small course which he describes as nothing strenuous.
Everyone was in good spirits, we're there for a great cause, fighting for the Pacific as he always does, and we're all joking around, and it was we just finished the prize giving and he dropped, so yeah, it was surreal.
David Letelier says he stayed with Fanana and said prayers as emergency services worked on him. Fire crews are fighting a large fire at a commercial building in Auckland this afternoon. Fire and Emergency says 15 trucks and 60 firefighters are fighting the blaze, which broke out at about 4:30 at a single-storey factory in the suburb of Onehunga. About 600 square metres of the building is estimated to be alight. Oranga Tamariki says it is already making changes after a damning report from the Ombudsman. In a new report released this afternoon, Chief Ombudsman Peter Bosher called for the new government to make urgent and sweeping changes to the Children's Ministry. He says Oranga Tamariki is still regularly failing to follow its own laws, and that is totally unacceptable for a government agency. Oranga Tamariki spokesperson Nicolette Dixon welcomes the report but insists change is already underway. Government Minister Mark Mitchell says Labour MP Ginny Anderson's comments about his past are for others to judge. The two were appearing on News Talk ZB this morning when Ms Anderson said Mr Mitchell was paid to kill people before he entered politics. Before becoming an MP, Mark Mitchell worked as a security contractor in Iraq and operated his own private military and security company. He says Ms Anderson texted him to apologise.
I think her comments, she's been judged by those. I think the court of public opinion has probably spoken pretty loudly in relation to that.
Labour leader Chris Hipkins says Ginny Anderson's comments went too far. A man who had sex with a 13-year-old in Nelson before trying to flee the country has been sentenced to home detention. Kwan Long Lee was arrested by police as he waited to board a flight to China last May and later pled guilty to 2 charges of sexual connection with a young person. Judge Tony Zorab says the offending was the result of selfish behaviour and Mr Lee's actions had caused incalculable harm to the victim and her family.
The contents of her victim impact statement only highlight her youth and her naivety and the extremely difficult position that you, as the older adult, placed her in.
Kwan Long Lee was sentenced to 9 months home detention and will be added to the child sex offender register. Australian authorities are making another legal bid to have a Tairāwhiti man extradited for a decade-old crime he didn't know he was suspected of. The man, whose identity is suppressed, is wanted by Western Australian police for a violent incident in a car park in 2014. Somya Bamiripati reports.
Perth police identified the man as a suspect in 2015, the year he left Australia. But New Zealand didn't get an extradition request until 2022. He was arrested that year, 2 months before the birth of his first child. The High Court last year ruled extradition would be unjust because of the time that's passed. Justice Rebecca Ellis said nothing suggests the man knew he was wanted, and he'd even travelled to Australia without problem. But the Australian government's today being granted leave to appeal that decision.
Entrepreneur Justine Ross has suffered critical injuries in an ATV crash near Wanaka. Mrs. Ross, who founded 42 Below Vodka and owns Lake Hawea station with husband Jeff, was among 3 people injured in the crash. Emergency services were alerted to the crash on a farm track off Te Madu Creek Road at about 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. All 3 people were flown to hospital by helicopter. Mr. Ross says the crash was caused by a mechanical failure. He confirmed his wife had suffered critical injuries, but says all 3 are expected to make a full recovery. And the Oscar-winning director Sam Mendes is to make 4 films about the Beatles. He says he's honoured to be telling their story. The BBC's Colin Patterson has more.
He's done Bond.
Help, I need somebody.
Now he's doing the Beatles. Sam Mendes is to make 4 Fab Four films. Each will be from the viewpoint of a different Beatle: John, Paul, Ringo and George. This is the first time that the band has granted full rights for the use of their story and music in a film. The quartet will be released at the cinema in 2027, although the order in which Beatle comes first has not been revealed.
Koinanga pito pito kōrero. That's the news.
Tomorrow after 1pm we explore the people and stories that define life in Aotearoa, New Zealand. From interviews with people doing interesting things that don't always make the news, to longer chats with notable New Zealanders about what makes them tick, plus a variety of music, reviews and live coverage of breaking news and events as they happen. That's on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan from 1pm weekdays here on RNZ National.
You are back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Gisborne, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, mainly inland. For the remainder of Te Ika Maui, the North Island, mostly fine weather. However, isolated showers tomorrow about Northland and Bay of Plenty. Also for Coromandel and from Waikato to Horowhenua. Marlborough, Nelson, Bulla and Westland, also Canterbury and Otago, except Clutha, fine weather. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, mostly fine but cloudy periods about the coast. Light drizzle developing about Fiordland and Rakiura, Stewart Island tomorrow. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. It is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Chief Ombudsman is calling for a complete overhaul of Oranga Tamariki, saying it is failing on almost every level. Judge Peter Bosher has found the agency is still regularly failing to follow its own laws in a way he says is totally unacceptable. But an advocate for children in care doesn't trust that Oranga Tamariki will heed the recommendations made. Jemima Houston reports.
A change on a scale rarely required of a government agency. The stark assessment the Chief Ombudsman says is needed after uncovering the level of failures at Oranga Tamariki.
They've got good practice, they know how to do it, but the discipline's lacking in actually doing it and getting it right. And in some respects in the country, there is good service. In others, it's awful. And it's that inconsistency which I find really, really alarming.
The Ombudsman reviewed 2,000 complaints which revealed serious inconsistencies in the way OT follows its laws. Tupua Erlich is an advocate for children in care and says it's scary how often the agency ignores its own procedures.
As someone who's survived, 12 years of abuse under their care, it's just insult to injury, really. I mean, policies are not optional, right? They're there to be followed. Yet when it comes to a big government agency like Oranga Tamariki, they seem to act like it is optional.
The review found reports of concern were inadequately responded to. Tamariki and older children were still being wrongly uplifted, and information provided to the family court was often wrong. As a result, Judge Peter Bosher has recommended the agency impose a service quality improvement plan, ensure staff follow legislation, and keep better records. Tupua Erlich from Voice Whakarongo Mai says he doesn't trust that Oranga Tamariki will take on the advice.
And so it is really frustrating for myself as an advocate when you're pushing for systems change. You can get it in writing and law, but into action is it's a whole different ballgame altogether, which it should not be.
Mr. Ehrlich says there have been countless reviews of the agency and very little has changed. He says that failure to improve is not good enough and continues to have life-changing consequences for Tamariki.
It's our children and young people that are at stake and their experiences of their childhood. What happens in childhood stays with us for a long time, and that will eventually be reflected upon society as a whole. So it's in everybody's interest that we get this right.
Oranga Tamariki's Nicolette Dixon acknowledges the experience of children and families outlined in the Ombudsman's report, but she says change is underway.
I would point to some of the things that we do see very clearly, which is the reduction of children who had come into care for those reasons, around working better with whānau, with communities. I would point to improvements we've already made in our own feedback and complaint process, and I would point to the partnerships we've built with iwi.
Ms Dixon insists the recommendations are already being actioned. The Minister for Children, Karen Chaw, says she wants to set clear priorities for Oranga Tamariki. She says she's currently working with frontline social workers to find out what those priorities are.
So it's making sure that we are actually resourcing frontline staff to be able to have the tools they need to do their job and do their job well. I know that a lot has been overworked and we need to support them in that space, and we need to make sure that we're getting that space right.
The Minister doesn't want to see the Ombudsman's report go on a shelf and be forgotten like the many reviews before it. She says it's important people know the agency is taking them seriously.
So that young people do know that their voices are being heard. It's not good enough for young people to say that they feel like they're invisible and they're not being listened to.
The Ombudsman has promised he will continue to keep a close eye on Oranga Tamariki.
As the full-scale invasion of Ukraine approaches its second anniversary, Russian forces are advancing on multiple parts of the country. Meanwhile, Ukraine's foreign minister has told CNN they would not have lost control of Avdiivka this week if the US had delivered the military aid, still tied up in the halls of Congress. Christiane Amanpour visited a military cemetery in western Ukraine where flags fly above the graves of fallen soldiers.
At first it looks beautiful, all the colours, the sheer density flying in the wind, so much Ukrainian yellow and blue. But when you realise that each flies above the body of a beloved, the pain is palpable. A mother cries for her son. He came from Poland, from abroad, says Lyubov. He went to liberate our Ukraine. He said, "Mum, I'm going to defend you." A woman seems to be talking to her fallen loved one. And this widow, Natalia, moves in for a kiss. Her husband, who had volunteered for the Eastern Front, was killed just shy of his 30th birthday 5 months ago, when shrapnel hit his head, leaving her and her small children alone. I'm proud of my husband because his sacrifice is worth a lot, says Natalia. I believe that it's the duty of every man to defend his homeland. Having 3 children, he could have not gone, but understood that he was going to defend us. Lycharkiv Cemetery in the western city of Lviv is like cemeteries all over Ukraine today. 2 years ago, this was a grass field. Today, it's a field of flags and the graves of those who've fallen defending this country. And on this 2-year anniversary, families are asking whether Ukraine can continue leaving it up to their volunteers or whether there needs to be a call-up to mobilize for the front. Natalia agrees. Yes, definitely, she says, because if we don't defend ourselves, what kind of fate awaits us next? And if we don't defend our lands, Russia will be here soon. In the center of Lviv, there is a small recruitment office for the Army's 3rd Assault Brigade, just through this courtyard. Sergeant Pavlo Dokin is in charge, and he shows us in. So, Pavlo, this is the recruitment office, the recruitment center? Yeah? It is exhausting, not only physically, but also for morale. Soldiers need to have normal rotations, Pavlo tells me, so that they can rest from all of that and start working with renewed vigor. The office is open all week. Sometimes a few show up, sometimes none. While we were there, just one. Why do you want to be in the military? Someone needs to defend our Ukraine, says Volodymyr, a 43-year-old builder. And that's the point. Starting a third year of full-scale war against the Russian invasion, they are heavily outmanned, and vital weapons and ammunition for their fight are tangled up in Washington's political gridlock under former President Donald Trump's direction. Speaking to world leaders in Munich this past weekend, President Zelensky said he'd invite him to see the war with his own eyes.
If Mr. Trump, if he will come, I'm ready even to go with him to the front line.
It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hospitals are normally places of safety, but the aim of the World Health Organization's rescue mission into Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza was to remove patients from danger. The hospital in Khan Yunis was besieged and raided by the Israeli army last week. It's seen as a Hamas outpost by Israel's government. There's no electricity, so no working ventilators for patients, and the WHO medics had to use flashlights to lead more than 30 severely ill patients out of the hospital. The BBC's Paul Adams sent this report.
Yes, good luck. We're just going to pull up on the side here and then line up facing the city so they can see us over.
After 2 days of waiting, a UN convoy finally makes it to Nasser Hospital. The sounds of war nearby. This is not a simple operation. It needs coordination with the Israeli military. But there are patients inside who badly need help.
Will you put your in oxygen? Can we get a head count for how many more spaces we have?
We still have one patient on a wheelchair, one patient on a stretcher can be fit in the ambulance.
Inside, the hospital is dark and eerie. With head torches, the team moves along filthy, deserted corridors. A handful of local staff remains, looking after around 150 patients, anxious to get those in need of treatment out of this dismal place. Dr. Athanasios Gargavanis is part of the WHO team.
This is the former emergency department at National Medical Complex. And it's a death zone.
I will prepare the patient intubated.
Exactly.
But I want a portable cylinder, 2 cylinders, small.
I need one arm here. No, 1, 2, 3.
NASA's director, Dr. Atef Al-Hout, is here, looking shattered. He's endured long days of military siege and occupation, the presence of Israeli troops inside the complex since last Thursday, the arrest of staff members suspected of working for Hamas, the herding of patients and staff into confined areas. Dr. Gargavanis pauses to recognise what the director and his staff have been through.
My words are not enough to express the respect that I'm feeling, not only for you, but for these people that have worked here.
How many more ICU we have here?
Like a patient on life support, the hospital is barely holding on. What little power there is being used to keep a handful of ventilators running. Most departments are now empty.
This place used to reconstruct limbs of patients that otherwise would be amputated. Now this place is no longer operational.
With the sickest patients now safely aboard a fleet of ambulances and with Israeli drones flying overhead, the international team leaves Nasser Hospital behind. It's dark now and the road is full of rubble. At a field hospital in Rafah, an elderly man is helped from an ambulance. He looks blank, hardly aware of his surroundings. He's safe now, but for how long? Another patient needs dialysis. She hasn't been treated for a week. Without Nasser Hospital, healthcare in the southern Gaza Strip is deprived of one of its most important facilities.
Meanwhile, the United States has once again vetoed a UN security resolution that demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. It's the third time the US has used its veto power to kill off a resolution calling for an end to the war. The ABC's Nicole Johnston has more.
In New York, international efforts to end the war immediately have failed. A resolution backed by Arab nations demanding an immediate ceasefire was vetoed by the United States. Instead, it's proposed its own resolution for a temporary ceasefire. So more debate and more delay. John Kirby is the US National Security Spokesman. He says the first resolution would jeopardise negotiations in Cairo for a temporary truce.
We just weren't able to support a resolution today that was going to put sensitive negotiations in peril. And that's what we believe this resolution would do. We are in the midst. In fact, Brett McGurk is traveling to the region as we speak.
But Palestinians don't see it that way. Noor O'Day is a political analyst in the West Bank and explains why she thinks the demand for an immediate ceasefire failed.
The UN Security Council has failed again because of one vote, the American vote. 13 countries voted in favor, and the US killed the resolution. It is advancing its own text, but I don't think that it is convincing to the other members of the Security Council.
What was the US's problem with the resolution that came from Arab countries calling for an immediate ceasefire?
They don't want references to international law as it relates to Israeli actions, because that is a downward spiral, I think, that the US doesn't want to risk.
In The Hague, the wheels of international law are turning. The International Court of Justice is debating the legality of Israel's military occupation of the Palestinian territories. That's the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. Israel doesn't recognise the World Court and denies all allegations against it.
In the US, Alabama's Supreme Court has ruled that frozen embryos are children, fueling fears about the future of IVF treatments. The unprecedented court finding means the embryos would be protected under the state's Wrongful Death of a Minor Act. CNN's Laura Agrier spoke to the president of the National Infertility Association and filed this report.
We simply don't know who has the rights here.
The controversial ruling by Alabama's Supreme Court could potentially block access to in vitro fertilization treatments for many across the state.
We are concerned if the physicians, the healthcare providers will be able to continue their care. People should be concerned about their future ability to get IVF treatment.
The decision comes after 3 couples sued a medical provider when their embryos were accidentally destroyed and overrules a lower court that said the embryos were not children. Now frozen embryos are entitled to the same legal protections as a child under Alabama law. The CEO and president of Resolve, a national infertility association, says that designation has widespread ramifications.
Now the court is saying that that's a person. Can we freeze embryos? I don't know. Can you freeze a person? What will happen to all of those embryos?
After the 8-1 vote, the lone dissenting associate justice said the decision almost certainly ends the creation of frozen embryos through in vitro fertilization in Alabama.
We might see this spread into other states as well.
In defending the ruling, another associate justice said the people of Alabama require the court to treat every human being in accordance with the fear of a holy God. Caught in between are the IVF patients.
Those embryos are the rights of the people who created them. They may decide to donate them to someone else. They may decide to donate them to medical science. They may keep them frozen, but they are their choice to do.
Russia is reportedly offering African governments so-called regime survival packages to keep them in power in exchange for access to natural resources. UK think tank, the Royal United Services Institute, says the notorious Wagner is carrying out the operation on behalf of the Russian state. And as the BBC's Joe Inwood reports, it shows Wagner still has influence after its high-profile leader died in a plane crash last year.
This was Yevgeny Prigozhin on his final tour of Africa. A few weeks later, he would be dead. At the time, few doubted why the mutinous mercenary boss had died. There was less certainty about what would happen to his Wagner empire. Now we know, as Dr. Jack Watlin from the Royal United Services Institute explains.
So there was a meeting in the Kremlin in which it was decided that Wagner's Africa operations would fall directly under the control of Russian military intelligence, the GRU.
The vast and valuable business and military operations Prigozhin had spent years building were to be broken up into two main components: the Volunteer Corps fighting in Ukraine and the Expeditionary Corps under the control of a man called General Andrei Avryanov. He was commander of Unit 29155, said to be behind the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal on the streets of the UK. This is the man now running Russian operations in Africa. The voice you can hear is the Russian Deputy Minister of Defense meeting a warlord called General Haftar in Libya. Along with General Avryanov, he went on a tour of Africa in September, meeting leaders from the CAR, Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. The offer, as Jack Watling explains, was a regime survival package.
The regime survival package is how the Russians are internally describing a group of capabilities that ranges from personal protection for partner leaders, information operations to boost their popularity domestically, a range of economic protections against Western sanctions for how they might be behaving, and this provision of quite capable military forces to allow them to go after their internal opponents.
Of course, this assistance comes at a price. This is the sound of Wagner supporting crowds in West Africa. But not everyone who encountered the group enjoyed the experience. There were widespread reports of massacres and human rights abuses associated with the group. On top of that, they had a policy of exchanging their services for mineral rights, from timber to gold. According to the report, that has continued. It's worth pointing out that the ease with which Russia seemingly supplanted the French was, to a considerable extent, down to the French's unpopularity and perceived security failings. This was the way that the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin was marked in the Central African Republic, a military band commemorating him at a monument to Russian soldiers. We now know that his death, however it was received, was not to signal the end of his operations in Africa.
It is often said that in the workplace, women have to work twice as hard to achieve the same level of success as men. But the opposite could be true when it comes to exercise. A new American study of almost 40,000 adults has found men need to spend twice as long exercising as women to get the same long-term health benefits, including a reduced risk of early death from heart attacks. The BBC has been trying to find out the reason behind these striking results.
I've just gone for a quick 10-minute run around the office. It's good to be outside, even if it is a cold day here in London. My heart rate is up and I'm breathing deeper. But it's frustrating to think a woman could get similar benefits I'm getting by running for just 5 minutes. That's according to a new study by the Journal of American College of Cardiology. Co-author Martha Galati told me more.
Some of the physiologic differences that might be related to why women benefit more from less physical activity is, first of all, women have lower lean mass and lower muscle mass, and they also have smaller muscle fibers when compared with men. Additionally, women tend to have a higher density of blood flow or capillaries which feed the muscles.
It's even better news for women when it comes to lifting weights. The study said they only need to do this once a week to achieve the same benefit I might get from visiting the gym 3 times a week. So far, just 6% of sports science research has focused exclusively on women's bodies. And former British rower Baz Moffat says she hopes the results will motivate women to do more exercise where they can.
I don't want us to interpret this information as kind of patronising women and telling women, oh, well, if you can find the time, you don't need to do as much as men. I'd like to think that we look at this study and we say, right, women, anything is better than nothing, and you will be gaining physiologically, and you'll be gaining more, according to this study, than the men are. You know, you're getting more bang from your buck for every minute of exercise that you're doing.
It's worth noting that the results of the study were self-reported. This means it's possible that the male participants did less exercise in reality than they said they did, something we've all been guilty of. But perhaps either way, findings like these will push us all to do a little bit more.
So the men told Porkies about how much they exercised. Quelle surprise. Before we go, some last bits of your feedback on tipping. You seem to be universally opposed to introducing more tipping. If we are tipping fully paid employees at restaurants for offering good service and to help them with the cost of living, then we better be ready to tip doctors, nurses, police officers and teachers. This is New Zealand, not a country where we need to tip, that person says. And another, oh my God, is there nothing we can do without having to have a phone and app, including having a walk and taking a pee? Tune in tomorrow for First Up from 5 a.m. They talk to Auckland councillor Alf Filipina, who pays tribute to his friend Efeso Collins.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Oranga Tamariki says it's already making changes after a damning report from the Chief Ombudsman. Peter Bosher told Checkpoint the Children's Ministry did not follow proper processes, showing intentional bias and relied on outdated information. The Prime Minister says his government has offered to support the family of Green MP Fanana Efeso Collins in any way it can after the 49-year-old's sudden death this morning. Fanana collapsed during a charity run in central Auckland. Fire and Emergency says 15 trucks and 60 firefighters are fighting a factory blaze in the Auckland suburb of Onehunga. And an 8-year-old boy has become the youngest player to beat a grandma